Hello, everybody. It's Mary Ann Bailey with the Senior Podcast Book Edition. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Mary Newport. Dr. Mary, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mary Ann. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about you before we get to your book, because your background does matter as far as qualifying for why you wrote these books. So would you introduce yourself, please?
Okay. I am a physician, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and did a lot of my medical training there, Xavier University, University of Cincinnati, and then finished my training in Newport Intensive Care in Charleston, South Carolina. And I practiced in Newport Intensive Care units for 30 years in the Tampa Bay area of Florida.
Oh, nice. Okay. And so you're the author of the Complete Book of Ketones. And I would appreciate it if you told people why you wrote the book and where the idea to write this book came from.
Okay. Basically, back in 2008, my husband was struggling with early on Alzheimer's disease. He was only 58 at the time, had already been dealing with it for about 7 years. And he was going downhill quite quickly. There are 7 stages to Alzheimer's, and he was between the 5th and 6th stage, so not doing very well. And I happened upon a press release on the internet about a medical food that was going to be out in about a year. And I learned that it was medium chain triglyceride oil, MCT oil. And I was familiar with it because I'm a newborn specialist. We used to add it to the feedings of our tiniest preemies back in the 1980s. And then they started adding it to infant formulas. And even today, you still find medium chain triglycerides in infant formulas. I learned that it was extracted from coconut oil. And Steve happened to be trying out for 2 clinical trials 2 days in a row. And he basically failed. He didn't get in that first day. And this was just about 8 hours after I learned about the possibility of using MCT or coconut oil. And the next day he tried out for it again, and he gained 4 points on the test and he qualified for the study. I didn't know at first what effect that had, if any, if it was just very good luck. But I started researching ketones intensively. Ketones are an alternative fuel for the brain. And when you consume an oil like MCT oil or coconut oil, it produces ketones in your liver, and the brain can use ketones as a fuel. And the reason that's important in a disease like Alzheimer's is that the brain has difficulty getting glucose, number one, into the brain, into cells in certain parts of the brain. And each cell needs fuel. And usually, if you're eating a typical diet, that will be glucose. But there's a problem with insulin resistance. It's very much like type 2 diabetes. And glucose does not get into these cells normally, but ketones do. They don't require insulin. They don't require anything special to get into the cells. And then they can produce this energy molecule called ATP that keeps them operating. It's like the power is on in the factory again when these cells in the brain. And my husband had a very dramatic response to this. And his story is it's summarized in this book.
Okay.
And then I became so interested in ketones, knowing that at that point there were 35 or 40 million people in the world dealing with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia, that I felt like I needed to get the word out about this. And the Complete Book of Ketones is actually my 3rd book that I wrote. It came out in 2019. So this was about 11 years after this happened with my husband. And in this book, it's historical in many ways. It talks about evolution and how even the simplest single cell organisms at the beginning of life use ketones as a fuel, and that humans wouldn't have survived without ketones to help fuel their brain when they had nothing to eat, sometimes for a week or 2 or 3. And now it could potentially help people with Alzheimer's and other neurological diseases, mild cognitive impairment that leads up to Alzheimer's. And so this book goes into the history, it goes into the research, and people have heard about the keto diet, ketogenic diet,
Right.
but they often don't know that this is very serious science. This diet has been around for over 100 years now. It was used to treat children with epilepsy. It would help control their seizures, almost completely eliminate in about 1/4 of cases, and about 1/2 of the other would have a great reduction in the number of seizures they would have. And it was being used at places like Johns Hopkins for 100 years. And now it's gotten very intensive study in the beginning of the 21st century here. And it's broadened now to include helping people with Alzheimer's, with cancer. Cancer cells love glucose, they love sugar. And if you can reduce the sugar in your diet and provide ketones, cancer cells can't usually use ketones as a fuel, but your other cells can. It could help slow the growth of the cancer. There are dozens of studies underway now looking at using the keto diet in conjunction with other treatments for cancer. So basically, in this book, I talk about all of those different aspects of how ketogenic diet could help somebody with these various conditions. But I also have interviews with 16 of the researchers. A couple of them are so old that they had passed away since I wrote this book, sadly. But they started studying this in the 1950s and 1960s, ketones and how they might be used therapeutically to help humankind, basically through nutrition. And they have even developed ketone products. People might have heard of ketone salts or ketone esters that are out that contain the actual ketone that we make in our bodies when we consume these ketogenic oils, or if you're on a ketogenic diet. And it talks about other strategies like overnight fasting, exercise, things like that stimulate you to produce ketones. And then another concept that people have is that the keto diet is all bacon and meat. You're going to eat a lot of bacon. You don't have to eat any meat, much less bacon on a ketogenic diet. There's a full range of ketogenic diets. And the strictest ketogenic diet is used to treat epilepsy and help people with cancer.
Oh.
And that's about 90% fat, 85, 90% fat in the diet. And it greatly increased ketone levels. But there's a whole range, a whole spectrum of ketogenic diets, starting with mild nutritional ketosis, where the levels of ketones are 1/10 of what you would get on the strictest ketogenic diet. And a lot of it is cutting carbohydrates, cutting portions down to reasonable sizes, and adding more fat to your diet. So the more fat you add, the less carbohydrate you eat, the higher your ketone levels get. But there's great value to eating a low carbohydrate diet that will put you in mild ketosis.
Okay. We want to keep some of the secret for the book. We
Yeah.
want people reading the book.
But there's a lot to learn in this book. So you'll learn about how to monitor yourself, how to deal with what's known as the keto flu. It's not an infection, but some people have a week or two where they don't feel so hot when they switch over to a ketogenic diet, but don't get discouraged because there are ways to try to overcome that. And then it talks about a whole food diet, how to plan such a diet for yourself with the foods that you like to eat, how to work in some carbohydrates that you like. And so there's just a whole lot in this book. It's long. It's a long book, but it's a little bit like, I hate to call it a Bible, but it's called the Complete Book of Ketones. And I tried to make it as complete as possible for somebody that wants to check this out.
So who is that somebody who wants to check this out? Who are good readers for this book?
Basically, everybody. It's never too soon to start thinking about what's going to happen to your brain as you age, for one thing. And so I would say adults. There are people with early onset dementia that start having symptoms when they're in their 30s. My husband.
Can it help people that are in the can it help people that are in the middle, say mid-stage dementia or Alzheimer's? Can they improve
Yes.
once they start a diet from something like that? And does that talk about that in the book?
It talks all about that in the book, how the oils, it talks about other people too. There are a couple of people that are featured in the book that have had long-term good results for years, with a man with Parkinson's, a husband and wife. The husband had Alzheimer's and improved so much that his doctors decided years later that he had mild cognitive impairment, which leads up to Alzheimer's. Instead of deteriorating and declining, he improved for several years by adding each of these ketogenic strategies. And so you'll meet some people like that. You'll meet physicians that are helping patients with it.
So, so along those lines, not to interrupt you, but we're talking about, so potential good readers. So caregivers that are dealing with people that have Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, stuff like that.
Right.
They're good readers for this book.
They'd be great
Well,
readers for this book. And then,
family members.
but to also think about themselves, because
Right.
if it's in your family, it's something to worry about. And both sides of my family, there are people that have had Alzheimer's very strong on my mother's side. So when Steve started taking coconut and MCT oil, I did too. I've been doing it ever since 2008 and doing other ketogenic strategies like the fasting, getting more exercise, that type of thing. I bet you'll learn how to do all of these, what the evidence is. There are tons of studies, there are tons of scientific references. I think even physicians, nurses, dietitians, other people who help people, with these conditions would be interested in reading this. I try to write it so that who's interested in this, who is not a scientist, has no science background, can understand it. But I have enough material in it and references that a physician or dietitian, a nurse, somebody who wants to learn more about it won't be insulted. I think they'll find it very useful and a good reference. I have had physicians say that they really enjoyed, they learned much more about Alzheimer's and some of these other things, how to do a ketogenic diet from my books than they had learned in medical school. So
I believe that. Okay. So they've read your book. You set your book down. They have one thought about your book. What are you hoping that one thought that they would take away from this would be?
Yeah, to think about their future brain health and how important nutrition and diet is for how your brain will age and how things will turn out for you at the end of your life, as far as your cognition, your memory cognition, and still recognizing your loved ones and still remembering what your life was all about. Nutrition and diet is very important. I basically ate a very poor diet. There's very little training in medical school about diet and nutrition, very little. It's very driven. And when I came to the realization that diet could impact somebody who had Alzheimer's, that nutrition is important, I started intensively researching it, completely revamped our diet. And now I want to help other people find that too.
All right. Dr. Mary, thank you so much for
Thank
telling us
you.
about the Complete Book of Ketones.
Very
Everybody just head over, click the purchase button and go check it out, because this is a book that everybody should be reading.
That's what it looks like.
All right. Dr. Mary, thank you so much for being with us today.
No,
Appreciate it.
thank you, Marianne.
All right. Bye-bye.